joined today by Ben Myres of Nyamakop, and we're going to be talking about his game, Semblance. So thanks for taking a little bit of time in your schedule to talk to us, Ben.
No problem. Glad to be here after so much back and forth.
We finally got it nailed down.
We did it.
So for people that have not heard of Semblance, why don't you give them a little bit of an elevator pitch? What's the game? What makes it unique? Why should they be excited for it?
So, Semblance is a puzzle platformer where the world is made of Play-Doh. And what that means is, if you can't reach a collectible high above you, in other games you might have to, unlock a double jump or some sort of ability. But in ours, you can literally deform the ground up beneath it so it's higher. So when you jump off the ground, you can reach the collectible more easier. Recently, we've been cheekily calling it the first real platformer, because everything else before it has just been a running and jumping on platformer. So this is the first true platformer, because you actually move and morph and shift the platforms. So yeah.
Use that grammar.
Oh yeah.
So for people that we'll have some footage of the trailer and some gameplay. When I first saw this game at PAX, I think it was last year, it grabbed me. It really is a game that is doing something really unique. And I have to ask, how did this idea of transforming the landscape kind of gestate? Where did it come from?
Yeah, it actually came from the co-founder and co-creator of the studio, Shakir Kamani, or Sugar as everyone calls him. And he's a brilliant programmer, but on this one instance, there was a bug in the game. And the whole game basically came from this bug. Because the game used to be about a character changing shape and size. And so we wanted to explore making the world feel soft and squishy like the character was. But we had this bug where every time you touched the platform, it would go down a little lower. And then he tweeted a GIF and I was like, oh my God, that's amazing. And I put a collectible underneath that bug and we realized that you could sort of unveil the collectible if you jump down enough times. And we were like, that's unbelievable. That is way more interesting than what we had before. Let's make that the whole game. So basically the whole game of this deforming platforms came from this bug. And we've kind of kept that mindset the whole way. We've had bugs and little quirks and tweaks that we've just leaned into and made full mechanics. So that's really where it came from.
That's cool to see something you didn't even intend, a bug, kind of develop into this wicked cool mechanic. I wanted to ask how you approach designing puzzles with this mechanic, because I have to imagine that where players have a lot of freedom in where and how they bend the environment, that's gonna be a little different than designing a puzzle where it's really kind of there's only one solution. People can do things a little bit in different ways in Semblance. Yeah,
totally. It's such a deep, a granular mechanic. There's so many different ways you can interact with most of the puzzles in the game that making it has really felt like we were discovering the mechanic as we were making it, basically. There was so much experimental and unforeseen gameplay that we'd never seen in other games, that we couldn't just bring it out of thin air. We had to kind of discover it as we were going along. So the process for designing our puzzles was we were really just exploring the mechanic and seeing what it could do. We were trying out ideas. It was very playful and fun, and what would happen if we put this element on this element and that element on that one, and then tweeting it and seeing if there was an interesting interaction from that. In terms of strict puzzle design, like you said, we had multiple kind of approaches. We had to, we looked at other puzzle games because it's kind of a meta platformer. It's speaking to the genre itself, right? So we looked at a ton of other puzzle platforms and said, oh, that's an interesting puzzle. How would it be different in our game with this mechanic? And almost transposed puzzles from completely different games into ours to see how that problem would be solved in a different way. And in other ways, we just said, okay, this element, let's see how many puzzles we can make around this element. And then, stuff like that pretty much. And like you said, it's been a crazy game to do quality assurance and playtesting for, because there's so much the player can do. We've been doing QA for the last, few months, and you see solutions that you just never thought were possible because your brain couldn't handle that many solutions in the puzzle that you made, and you're just this is ridiculous. So
I was specifically thinking of that picture that's been making the rounds on Twitter of you watching a person playtesting Semblance at GDC. Yeah, it's gotta be. What does it feel like as the developer when you're watching somebody play your game and they find something you never thought of? Because obviously you and Sugar, two people,
Yeah.
you can only have so many thoughts in your heads.
Yeah.
Throw it out to the floor at GDC or PAX. People are gonna find stuff. Is that something that's exciting, or is it something that is maybe a little scary?
I think it's a lot about how much confidence you have as a designer, and it's about the confidence you have to be okay with failing and be okay with like learning from playtests. Like I think a lot of designers are afraid of playtests because they're afraid it's too early to show it to someone and that they'll show something's broken or something's wrong, and they know the feedback they're going to get. But like we've been so engrossed in playtesting, like, and we love going to shows because for that exact reason, people like do stuff in the game that you've never thought of or imagined was possible with the mechanics. And instead of like sort of flinching away from that, we love to sort of lean in and see how it's deeper and more interesting that you can do stuff like that. Like so often when we see a player come up with a new solution for a puzzle, we'll think about if it falls in a general range of ways we wanted them to solve the puzzle, and it falls within a loose range instead of like a deliberate solution, then we like either leave that solution there or we lean in and split it off into another puzzle. So yeah, we love seeing players discover new ways to interact with this game, and we're really, really excited to see the sort of speedrunners interact with this game, because it's kind of like this collaborative level design experience. So we're really interested to see how little you need of the level and the morphing to actually complete some of these puzzles. It's going to be super exciting.
Yeah, once the speedrunner community gets there, things are going to get crazy. I think that gives kind of a good background to the development of Semblance. A little bit of a sneak peek. So let's talk about your history. So what really brought you to get involved in the world of independent game design?
Yeah, so me and Shakir, the co-founder, were studying university in South Africa. We were studying a game design course. And this project was actually our final year university project. And Sugar had been working on this idea by himself. And he was exploring abstract paintings. Like what could you do if you set a game in like a Pollock or a Rothko painting? So he made this little character and he wanted to do something about changing the shape and form in the world. And that's where the sort of character changing thing came from. And then I saw this and I was like, wow, that's a really interesting visual style and a cool sort of mechanic. Let's work together. So we started working together, and then halfway through the year, we had this midterm examination, and our so-called external examiner was this ex-Naughty Dog technical art lead. He'd been the technical art lead on the Uncharted games and The Last of Us. He's like one of the first few names you see on the credits after those games finish. And the first thing he said to us was, you guys should make this into a commercial game. And we were like, oh my God, that's ridiculous. Like for someone of that, notoriety to say that to you.
That's pretty good feedback.
Yeah, exactly. And it was like a really awful, shitty, like little mechanical prototype with not much art. It wasn't much to look at. And so we kind of started working on it part-time on the side and kept working on it. Eventually found some investment. That guy who said that to us, he's our mentor still. And then, recently we found a publisher as well. So it's just kind of been this hustling, keep going all the time, sort of falling further and further into indie games. And I think both me and Sugar were both involved in the indie game scene in South Africa while we were at university at the Amaze Johannesburg Festival. I was doing some organizational work on it, and he won the first Amaze Johannesburg award. So we were already quite engaged in the local scene. But this game really sort of allowed us to fall down the rabbit hole of the international indie game scene. Submitted to all these events. We just sort of traveled and went to E3 and PAX and Gamescom. You saw it at PAX, and that was the first show we ever showed it at.
Yeah, I remember talking to you guys.
So it's been kind of a wild journey.
Yeah. So what were some of the games, either while you were studying, kind of looking at games from less of a necessarily player and more of a developer, that were inspirational to you? What are some of the games that you can think back to that's the game that made me want to make games?
So I think for Shakir, Sugar, it was Metal Gear Solid. He really loves those games. You can never really explain why, but he loves those games. because they're a bit weird, and you kind of don't want to look at it too deeply. I think for me, when I was in high school, I was a very commercial video game player. I was playing a lot of like FIFA and Call of Duty and stuff like that. And when I fell into this game design course, I just found this huge wealth of experimental, wonderful, indie games. So I fell in love with kind of like almost the modern god of indie games is what got me into games like in a really intense way. Games like JS Joust, the experimental move controller game, and the floor is jelly and bread, and all these like really modern games really got me into it. When I was younger, I played Age of Empires and things like that. But I think it's really these modern indie games that made me move from like a casual games player to like this really dedicated consumer and creator of work in the medium.
Cool. And that's an excellent segue. Speaking of modern indie games, we always ask what indie games out there now have captured your attention from a design standpoint, and especially if they're games that people probably haven't heard of.
Yes. So I was at a residency in Sweden for 2 months called Stugan, and I think a lot of the games that are there are absolutely amazing, and not enough people know about them. Dandara just came out, which is pretty amazing. I think a lot of people know about. I think one of my favorite games from that residency is a game called 10 Mississippi. And it's a game where all the visuals are photos from someone's real life that you're playing through with these small little interactions.
Oh, that's cool.
And it's beautiful and intimate and like, very vulnerable. It was nominated for an Independent Games Festival Nuovo Award this year. So it's really amazing. I think it's going to come out really soon. So I'd really recommend people take a look at that.
Perfect. Yeah. There's a couple really good recommendations. Stugan always seems to have really good stuff coming out of it. We've talked to a bunch of other people that have been at Stugan, so it's a Indiedev facet for sure. Awesome. Well, Ben, thank you for taking a little bit of time, giving us a little bit of a backstory of Semblance and about you and Sugar's kind of journey to make it. It'll be coming out on PC, Mac, and on Switch.
Yes.
At some point this year. So we'll have links to the site and all that good junk so people can find it if they're interested.
Cool. Thanks, Jacob. Appreciate making it happen.